Okay, and I believe closed captioning, Todd, is available for this as well.
Yes, it should be. We still do have the service.
Okay, great. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Randy Rosenbaum. I'm Executive Director of the Rhode Island State Council on the Arts, and I'm delighted to be here with my colleagues at the State Arts Council to talk to you about granting opportunities for individual artists, for arts and culture organizations and nonprofit organizations, for teaching artists, educators, local community groups. We're pleased to be able to provide some financial support to make the arts more available throughout our state for all the people of our state. As we go through this presentation, you'll get to meet some of the people that should be your new best friends, the people who can help you put together a strong application for support from the state of Rhode Island. But before we get into this material, a few items of importance. First, for every public meeting that the Arts Council engages in, we'd like to acknowledge that the land on which we live, work, and enjoy the arts actually belongs to others. And it is riskless practice to acknowledge that the grounds on which we are meeting are indigenous lands. Our offices in Providence are on the ancestral homelands of the Narragansett Nation. RISCA is a committed ally, and as artists, we honor the indigenous people, their ancestors, the culture, and the artistic representation, past, present, and future. We recognize the continued existence and contributions of indigenous people to our society. We also want to make sure that this presentation is as accessible as possible to all Rhode Islanders. If you look at the bottom of your screen, you may be able to find, and unfortunately I can't find it at the moment, but I'm told it is there.
No, it's not working.
Okay, well then.
Todd and I are troubleshooting.
Under normal circumstances, we also provide closed captioning for these presentations. And the voice that you just heard was Molly Flanagan, our individual artist program director. She's checking to see whether that can be corrected or not. We will also be recording and, if appropriate, placing this recording on YouTube. And YouTube does quite a credible job of generating closed captioning. So there's another way that you can access this if that is needed for you. I'm going to begin this presentation by talking about who we are. One slide back, if you would. Thank you. And then set the stage for your learning about funding opportunities through the State Arts Council. So RISCA stands for the Rhode Island State Council on the Arts. We are a state agency, so the people that are going to be talking to you are all state bureaucrats. And we are supported by appropriations from the Rhode Island General Assembly and the Governor of Rhode Island. And we also receive financial support from the National Endowment for the Arts, a federal funding agency. We use those funds to support grants, which is what we're going to be talking about today. But we also provide technical assistance and staff support to arts organizations and artists, schools, community centers, social service organizations, and local governments, all designed to bring the arts into the lives of Rhode Islanders. Everything from, and you will hear, professional development programs to one-on-one assistance to make sure that you get the assistance and support that you need as a resident of the state of Rhode Island. Next slide, please. So RISCA awards grants for arts activity in the following areas. We award support to nonprofit organizations, to individual artists. We give arts and education grants, which runs the gamut from supporting teaching artists and art educator professional development programs to a variety of things that help support the inclusion of arts in schools, in community centers, and the like. We have a vibrant folk and traditional arts program that supports artists who work out of a traditional art or cultural tradition. And we also have an arts and healthcare program that provides support for teaching artists to work in healthcare facilities throughout our state. Because we're an arts council, in all of our granting programs, the arts are central to what we do. So if you're focusing on art and the deliverance of art and the creation of art, this is the place you should be. We're an arts funder and we fund arts projects and programs. Next slide, please. Just to give you a bit of a timeline, we are currently discussing applications that will be submitted at our October 1, 2021 deadline. These are for projects that take place between the periods January 1 of 2022 and June 30 of 2022. The state fiscal year is July 1 through June 30, and the programs that we support have to fall within those parameters. So back in April and coming up in April, there are projects for that full year. The October 1 deadline is for projects for the 6-month period between January 1 and June 30th of 2022. For every grant that we award, we need to receive back from you, once the project is completed, a final report that tells us how the money was spent and what you did with the money. Those final reports are due whenever your project is finished, but they must be submitted within 30 days of the end of our fiscal year, which is July 31st of 2022. Next slide, please. And now I toss it over to Molly Flanagan, our individual artist program director.
Hi, friends. Nice to see you all. Just a heads up that I actually have to duck out at 2 p.m. for an unexpected mandatory meeting. But what we have at the October 1st deadline is all 12 different disciplines of the fellowships, which are anonymously reviewed, unrestricted awards based solely on artistic merit. So therefore, a solo art practice based on work that you've already completed, depending on your discipline, you're going to submit up to 10 images, a full play or screenplay, 2 to 3 audio recordings of music you've composed, 2 to 3 videos of dances you've choreographed, etc. In each of those 12 disciplines, there are $1,000 and $1,000 and one $5,000 award in each of the disciplines will be awarded at the October 1st deadline. Next slide, please. So these are the 12 disciplines of the fellowships that I oversee: choreography, crafts, which is functional and non-functional, drawing and printmaking, film and video, fiction, music composition, new genres, painting, poetry, play and screenwriting, photography, and three-dimensional art. And these, you pick which discipline fits your work the best. I can help as much as I can, but I'm not a discipline expert in all of these fields. And you can submit applications in more than one discipline. You just have to submit completely different works, because I know lots of artists are working in more disciplines or overlapping disciplines, more than one discipline. And next slide, I think I'm done.
Hi, my name is Elena Calderon Patiño, and I'm the Community Arts Program Director, but I also oversee the folk and traditional arts. The folk arts are defined as artistic practices which are community and family based that express the community's aesthetic heritage and tradition. The learning process is informal and passed down from generation to generation by word of mouth, apprentice, and imitation. If you have any questions about folk and traditional arts and wonder if what you do is falls under folk and traditional arts, I'll be happy to have a one-on-one consultation with you. Some examples can be Nigerian talking drum, the Cape Verdean Batuku dancing, but the best way to really know whether you fit into this category of grants is to have a conversation with me. Next slide. So there are 2 apprenticeship grants. The folk art apprenticeships are designed to foster traditional artistic skills between a master and apprentice, and the grants are up to $3,000. So usually the master artist applies to these. We do need information about the apprentice. And the advantage of these grants is that you can also apply for 3 years in a row, because we understand the apprenticeships take much longer than 1 year and much longer than 3 years. But we offer the possibility of applying 3 years in a row. That doesn't necessarily mean that you'll receive the grant every 3 years, because we do change. It's a panel process and we have different panelists, but you do have that advantage. The folk art fellowships are provided to support individual master folk artists who demonstrate the highest level of skill in their craft. And there are only 2 awards, one for $5,000 and one for $1,000. So the advantage of the folk art fellowships, the grant is a little easier to apply for, but there are only, like I said, 2 awards. So if 10 artists apply to a folk art fellowship, there will only 2 will be granted an award. We've moved the deadline to October 1st, and I'll put on the chat my email. If anybody has any questions or want to set up an appointment with me, I'd be happy to meet with them one-on-one. That is a requirement to apply, that you do meet with me. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Todd Trebor. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I'm the organization's program director at Fiscal. I'm going to talk to you a bit about Arts Access grants. Arts Access grants are our project grants for organizations. They are grants of up to $3,000, as you see, in support of arts and culture projects that are relevant and meaningful to a Rhode Island community or communities. I say up to $3,000 in this case because with Arts Access grants, it's very common for applicants to receive partial awards as we try to support projects that are happening around the state in a variety of communities. The parameters of this program, you see, support arts and culture projects that are relevant and meaningful to a Rhode Island community or communities. Pretty broad when we say arts and culture projects. We're interested in arts and culture projects that engage with the public or the public and engage with the broader communities. And that can look like a lot of different things. We historically fund things like festivals where there'll be thousands of people in attendance. For instance, we've funded in the past the Rhode Island Cape Verdean Heritage Subcommittee's annual festival that happens in July. We funded Oasis International's African Summer Bash, for instance. We also fund projects that are more intimate in terms of their impact on a community. For instance, we've funded the Friends of the Rhodey Center for World Music's African Steel Drum Lessons, which maybe reach about 24 people involved in them, and those experiences are free for the youth that participate in them. We've also funded in the past Refocus's Little Clay Studio, which is a clay studio for developmentally disabled adults, where they produce work and then they have a show and they also sell their work as well. So we define impact and public value and public engagement as meaning many, many people, but also very few people. Next slide, please. For this project, for this program, I should say, there are 2 deadlines every year. You can apply for this project at the April 1st deadline with the dates in terms of when the activities are eligible for that given deadline, as Randy articulated at the beginning, and also the October 1st deadline, which is coming up, obviously. In order to apply for this, you must be a nonprofit organization or fiscally sponsored by a nonprofit organization. If you're not clear what that means, I'm going to talk about that on the next slide, so just hold on for one moment. Any nonprofit can apply. You can be an arts and culture nonprofit. You could be a social services nonprofit. You could be an environmentally focused nonprofit, a social justice nonprofit. As long as the activity that you're doing and applying for is an arts and cultural activity, you're good to go. In the application, you're going to discuss how your program might be modified during the pandemic should conditions change. Just know, and some of us will talk about this when it comes to project grants specifically, just know that we understand it's a very fluid time and we're flexible if things change from your original plan, but panels will want to see what you're thinking in case we have to shut things down in a way that we had to do in the prior 18 months. For those of you who have looked at the program guidelines previously and are familiar with the idea of cash match, historically, this grant program has had a one-to-one cash match requirement, meaning that if you requested $3,000 from RISCA, you need to show that you have $3,000 of money that's either confirmed or projected coming from other sources. So what that historically meant is that you would, if you were requesting $3,000, your total project budget would have to be $6,000. The reason behind this is that historically, a long, long time ago, when the NEA was founded, they had it be a requirement for all grants that anyone receiving the grant would have to have that cash match requirement. And that was a way to build support for the arts within a community outside the funding that was just coming from the National Endowment for the Arts. Flash forward 50 years, having that cash match was a barrier to people receiving grants, particularly communities that have been barred from being able to generate wealth in some way, same ways as other communities. So particularly communities of color and rural communities. So we've waived that cash match for the October 1st deadline because of the pandemic and people's difficulty in fundraising, understandably, for arts and culture, but we're also waiving it for the next 3 years. So just for you all to know that waiving is for both this deadline and moving through 3 years coming forward. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, fiscal sponsorship, if you're not a nonprofit organization, but you are an organization, you're just not a 501c3 registered nonprofit organization, you can still apply. You would just have another nonprofit that would act as your fiscal sponsor. What that means is if they're a fiscal sponsor, you submit the application in their name. That's it. And then there's a letter of agreement that's very simple between you and the fiscal sponsor, where the fiscal sponsor says, hey, I know this organization, they're great. I'm going to accept this grant on their behalf, and I'll just be responsible for all the reporting requirements, et cetera. Now, by them being responsible, that doesn't mean they do them. That means that you do them as the applicant, but they're ultimately responsible when it comes to, you know, the ultimate responsibility. Previously had been that we allowed for fiscal sponsorship to happen in this project grant program, as well as you can see our project grants for education and healthcare. But the organization that was already receiving funding from RISCA, either through another grant program, could not be a fiscal sponsor. That's been waived now, so any organization can be a fiscal sponsor and they can fiscally sponsor more than one application in a round. If you have questions about that, you'll be able to reach out to me and ask me about those. Don't worry about that. We made this change again because it was just a barrier for people to apply and organizations to apply for fantastic programs that are doing to serve communities or engage with communities that are very important to us in this state. Next slide, please. And actually, let me see. I see there's a question. Great. Yeah. Maggie, go ahead and take it away.
Hi, everyone. My name is Maggie Anderson, and I am the Arts and Education Director here at RISCA, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm going to talk to you about some funding opportunities for education specifically. Our first major granting category in education are project grants in education. These applications are accepted twice a year at the April 1st and October 1st deadline. Again, projects coming in this October would be for the second semester in our education terminology of the 21-22 school year. So for projects that happen between January 1st and June 30th, 2022. So our project grants in education program provides support maximum of $10,000 to artists and cultural organizations collaborating with schools and other educational entities to support school-based residency model arts engagement that enhances student learning. What does that mean? That's a really nice sentence, right? What does that mean? That means that we are looking to support projects where arts learning is happening that enhances the learning that the students would already embark upon during their school year. It's this project model that we fund is based off of the old idea of an artist in residence in a school. But what we ask is that there are at least 10 engagements between the arts organization and the same group of students or teachers if it's a professional learning project. And that in those 10 experiences, there's a scope and a sequence where the learning builds on itself and it's enhancing the regular learning that's happening in the classroom or the regular professional learning that's happening for teachers. These grants are most successful when the school or the district is the applicant because it shows buy-in on the part of the educational entity. These grants do have a match. It's a 1-to-1 match, but it's not a full cash match. So that means if you're asking RISCA for $10,000, the total project budget is $20,000. And of the $10,000 that the applicant needs to show as their match, up to 50% of that can be an in-kind match. So again, using the $10,000 example, if you're asking us for 10 for a project that costs 20, you have 10 and 5,000 of that is in cash, and the other 5,000 can be an in-kind donation. So perhaps you're mounting a student theater production and all of the costumes and are being donated by a local fabric store, and that has some sort of value to it. The tickets and the programs are being printed by a local printing shop, and that has a value to it. So all of those things could be in kind. I will say, if there are any school representatives here on the call right now, a great way to apply for this project and show a full cash match is just to use either Title IV funds or any of the entitlement funding that the school regularly has in their operational budget as a full cash match to these projects. And so we can talk about that more if you're interested in having a one-on-one conversation about eligibility. I'm advancing the slides, so next slide, please. So a while back, we also realized that we were hearing from a lot of our teaching artist community that schools would be very enthusiastic about hearing their ideas and wanting to work with them, but they were very hesitant to either apply for a PGE to get the work done, or they were hearing that there wasn't cash in the school's budget to pay for the program. So we looked at our project grant and individuals category and sort of merged that with the project grant and education, and came up with this opportunity for individual artists to apply for project grants and education. So for this category, it is an individual teaching artist who would apply to pilot a program, same model, pilot a school-based semi-residency model where the arts learning enhances the in-school learning. And this individual artist could apply for a grant of up to $3,000 to run their pilot program. There is no match required here. So this would be you coming in and saying, we have this great idea for arts learning to happen in an educational setting. I would be the teaching artist. Here is my plan. I'd like $3,000 to execute it. The idea is that this feeds into the category I just discussed. So once you do your pilot and it's an awesome, huge success, then in the coming years, the school or the district would apply for a PGE to keep the work ongoing and keep the program to still happen. We also have funding that's historically been for transportation. We have something called the Big Yellow School Bus Fund. Historically, these were grants of $400 paid to schools to offset the cost of bus rentals to get to an arts and cultural field trip. Last year, as some of you may know, when there were no field trips allowed by the Rhode Island Department of Education, we pivoted this source of funds, and we determined that schools could apply for grants for up to $350 to be reimbursed to pay artists and arts organizations to do a virtual field trip for their students. That pivot was really successful, and we heard from a lot of teaching artists that worked out really well for them. And there were a lot of really cool Zoom experiences that happened because of this. So this year, with things being as fluid as they are, we've reimagined what this fund is again, and we've decided to do both. So during the 2021-22 school year, 2 types of funding is available through the Big Yellow School Bus Fund. It's important to know that this is a reimbursement grant. So that means that the school or the educational entity pays upfront, and then we reimburse them after the experience has happened. So schools and educational entities may apply for grants of up to $350 to support artist fees for a virtual field trip. Or if schools are able to attend in-person field trips, schools may apply for grants of up to $750 to offset the costs of the bus. And so the in-person field trip is still only to offset bus costs. Each school may apply for 1 experience at each grade level once a year. So 1-1-1. So an elementary school may apply for one of these grants at the first grade level, the second grade level, the third grade level, the fourth grade level, the fifth grade level. And these are rolling applications. There's no, if you meet the general eligibility, your application will be accepted, and it's rolling first come, first serve. So, and just a note about project grants in education during COVID-19. We will not ask in any of our applications what the pandemic plan is. In order to be eligible at the time of when you submit your application, you just have to make sure that you're adhering to the most current school-related COVID guidance, and you can find that on the COVID-19 information page at the Rhode Island Department of Education's website. And it's the link right here. I can also, if one of my colleagues wouldn't mind dropping that link into the chat, that would be great. But as long as, you know, we anticipate that these projects will be very different from what they have been in former years because of the pandemic. They certainly were at the April 1st deadline. And so as long as your planning shows some sort of adherence or makes some sort of reference to RIDE's COVID-19 guidance, that's all that we need on our end to evaluate your project. Healthcare.
And that is me. Hi, everyone. It's Randy Rosenbaum again. I am currently coordinating the Project Grants in Healthcare program. This program, like the others that have been described, have an April 1 and October 1 deadline. And for the October 1 deadline, if you are a healthcare facility and are interested or are currently working in providing artistic experiences to patients or clients in a healthcare setting, such as a hospice, hospital, community health agency, you can apply for support in this program. These are grants of up to $10,000. They are one-to-one match, and they provide support for teaching artists to go in and work with your population. If you have, an example of a grant that's been funded is klezmer artist Michael Bresler, wandering the wards in Rhode Island Hospital, providing musical experiences to adult patients there. And he also did a program at Hasbro Children's Hospital. If you have any questions about this program, you can contact me directly about it. And again, the deadline is October 1st. Next slide, please.
Okay, so that has been this is Maggie Anderson again. So that has been an overview of the programs that are going to be available at the October 1st deadline. So what we're going to do now is we're going to walk you all the way through the application and decision process, broad overview. And then my colleague Todd is going to do a quick learning session around budgets and some specific support materials that can strengthen an application. The best thing to do would be to put questions that you have in the chat, and there will be a designated Q&A slide at the end. And what we will do is one of my colleagues will make sure to make note of all of the questions, and we'll hit all of them at that end period. But if you don't want to save the thought, you can go ahead and put it in the chat at any time through this overview process, okay? So the application process at RISCA, the first thing that you need to do is access our website or the follow-up email that you'll get from today's webinar, and you'll read the guidelines for the program that you're interested in applying. The guidelines are the exact same documents that the evaluation panels get from us. So it's important to know that there's a singular guidance document for the applicant and for the evaluators. And so the most important thing that you can do is read the guidelines to determine if you're eligible and if your project is a good fit. Then on every guideline, you'll see the contact information for the program director who oversees that program. The second thing you want to do is talk to the staff member. Here's why that's so important. RISCA staff does not make any decisions when it comes to funding. The grants are all reviewed by panelists, and RISCA staff are not on those panels. So it is literally our jobs to help applicants apply for funds from us. And because we don't make any decisions in the panel room, we can talk you through what makes a strong application. So you want to make sure that you make some time to speak with us, because we are here to help you leading up to the October 1st deadline. If you haven't done so already, if this is your first time applying, you're going to create a profile on Foundant, which is our online grants portal. Then you're going to write your application and gather your support materials. You're going to hit submit, which is a button at the bottom of the application on the portal before the deadline. And then you're going to wait for what seems like forever, but there's a lot going on while that's happening. So after you hit submit, and once you start waiting, the staff, so the program staff, all of us, so we're going to review your application for eligibility and completeness. This is just the little things, like something we see all the time is that people upload a W-9 instead of a 990, right? So we're just going to do little things like, did you do the right tax form, stuff like that, to make sure that you're eligible. The program director will be in touch with you if there's an eligibility problem, right? So once you hit submit and wait, all of the outreach happens from us to you. Then in each category, there will be a panel review of the applications, and those panelists, as I said, will make all of the decisions and all of the funding recommendations. We write up all of the notes for what happens and is what is recommended out of the panels, and then we have to give that to our governing council. So our council reviews the panel's recommendations and quite often signs off on that. And then once we get council approval, we will tell you the good news. Congratulations, you've been approved for a grant. We can't wait to see your project happen. We will mail you a check and the amount of your grant. This takes, on average, about 8 weeks after you submit all the material that you need to submit. That's because we're a state agency. Randy said that we're all bureaucrats at the beginning of this. And so there is a lengthy state procurement process that people have to go through to get a check from the state. Then you do your project between January 1st and June 30th, and then you report back to us by July 31st. After you get your grant. So congratulations, you got your grant. This is so awesome. You need to log back into the online portal and you need to fill out your grant agreement. And then you need to make a vendor profile with Ocean State Procures. We can't send you any money until you do this first step. And so it's 8 weeks from when you do that first step that we can get you your money. If you have any questions about the panel feedback, because everyone will get panel feedback in the project grant categories, I should say in the project grant categories, everybody will get panel feedback. You want to ask your program director, you can call us up, send us an email and ask us anything about the process, and we are able to give you that information. Also, we ask you to stay in communication with us if the scope and sequence of your project changes. We anticipate that to be the case given the pandemic, but in general, if that's ever the case, if you've received partial funding and you may not be able to fully execute the original proposed program, there's nothing punitive that happens. You just call us and keep us posted. And you let us know what's happening. You use the Risca logo on your promotional material. We will amplify on our social media channels. And ask us questions at any point in the process. Please ask us questions and invite us to attend. We love to come to the projects. If you don't get the grant, the program directors are still available to you. So if you don't get the grant, you'll get panel feedback that explains why. We encourage you to meet with us. We can give you more than just the panel comments that explain why. We can walk you through and we can encourage you to apply again and maybe point you to exactly some of the small changes that you can make to have your project fully funded. We see great success with this. So people who may come through the first time and not get applied, if they do these 2 follow-up steps, we see a really good return on investment for those applicants. Partial funding. Todd spoke to this a little bit, but we are a state agency and we do have a limited budget. In all of these categories, we often get many more applicants than we would ever have the ability to fund. And it is also part of our values statement to be funding great things that are happening throughout the state. So partial awards are very common. Todd will talk about the importance of this again when he talks about letting us know everything in the budget and in the budget notes and stuff. But if you are partially funded and you are unable to scale back your project and still execute it, you may decline the grant. So if you come in for an arts access grant and you ask for $3,000 and you get a $750 award, and some of your other projected funding didn't come through either, and you're not able to execute the project, you may decline the $750 award from us and nothing bad will happen. A few of my colleagues have already pointed out that every time we have a panel, it's different panelists. So no one will know that you got an award that you turned down. There's absolutely no punitive actions for declining the grant. It just means that you can't do the project with the money we have available to you. Okay, so the panel process. There are between 3 to 5 panelists for each grant panel. For my colleagues who run fellowship panels, they often only have 3 panelists. The majority of the panelists are Rhode Island residents, but all panelists have arts and culture expertise and involvement. And again, as you can imagine with the fellowship programs and the folk arts fellowship programs, those are experts in the specific discipline or in the field of folk arts. RISCA prides itself on assembling panels with an eye to diversity in many forms. So that's everything from racial and ethnic diversity to age, gender diversity, geographic diversity. We are attentive to all of that so that the panel best represents the diverse populations of the state. Currently, panelists can only serve once in 3 years, which means 6 grant cycles. So we also see a diversity of panelists in that way, right? And because the panel is different every single time, decisions vary every single time based on the expertise and the composition of the panel. Again, the panel documents that are given for guidance and training are the exact same documents you have access to as the applicant. So we cannot encourage enough for you to read the guidelines and definitely look at the evaluation rubric. That's right there on the webpage for each program too. So you see exactly the documents that we're training our panelists to use when they're evaluating. And just, again, can't emphasize enough that the RISCA staff does not make any funding decisions. So let us help you, please, 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 please. So, oh, and there's a whole slide for it. Yeah, sorry. Should have anticipated that. But go ahead, Molly, if you want to speak to this.
Yep. So for fellowships are adjudicated very differently than the project grants. There are 3 panelists on each of the discipline panels. So that means that drawing and printmaking has its own 3-person panel. Folk and traditional arts has its own 3-person panel that Elena runs. Primarily out of state for my 12 disciplines is primarily out of state panelists who are experts in their discipline, curators, artists, faculty at art schools, gallerists, etc. In the past, I've had a programmer from Jacob's Pillow. I've had a curator from Mass MoCA. I try and get those folks so that even if you don't receive the fellowship, your work is getting in front of folks that might move your career forward in some way. These fellowship applications, this is not true of Elena's folk and traditional fellowships, but for the other 12 disciplines, the applications are reviewed anonymously. The panelists will just look at the artwork. They don't see an artist statement. They don't see your name. They don't see where or if you went to school, any of that. They just look at the artwork. So it's really different for the fellowship panels than the project grants. Okay, and I think I'm done now.
Okay, so the panelist process. So this information is true for all panelists. So the invitation and selection is done by RISCA staff. The panelists receive the guidelines and training packet. Again, same documents that you have access to. The panelists receive the applications via the online grant system, except for the fellowship process that Molly just talked about. They get that on the panel day in the panel room. Panelists review and pre-score applications at home. We like to tell you that in our experience, panelists are looking at your material about 30 minutes per application. And so we say, and they're looking at somewhere between 25 and 35 applications. So we say that because we want you to be comprehensive in your application, but there's a fine line between like the right robust support materials, and everything in the kitchen sink that shows how awesome your organization is, because you've got to be attentive to how much material our panelists are going to be looking at. And then panelists will meet for an all-day, previously in person, but currently via Zoom review session. There is group discussion about each application. Panelists do have the opportunity to rescore based on discussion and things discussed in the room. And then what happens is the program directors who are facilitating the panel meeting will be making notes of all the scores and score changes. And so at the end of the day, those are tabulated and then numerically ranked. And then the panelists make funding recommendations for each application using the rankings and the total available budget. Okay, so this is my last slide, but it's a really, really, really important one. As I mentioned, it is our job leading up to the October 1st deadline to help you in any way that you need and in any way that we can. However, we are all humans as well, who have lives and lives at home. And so we really cannot help you on October 1st after like 5 p.m. So we're going to ask you to make use of us well in advance of the deadline day. We do not accept late applications under any circumstances. We use an online grants portal, and that grants portal closes at 11:59 p.m. on October 1st. Hard technology close. So you can't email anything. If you were like getting it all in there and you were going to hit submit and you didn't hit submit, we cannot help you. So we ask you to please, please, please consider being in touch with us well in advance of the final deadline. That being said, we do typically host drop-in office hours via Zoom on September 30th and October 1st during work hours for like last minute questions, but we cannot help you once the deadline passes. Cool. All right. Todd Trebor.
Hello, Todd Trebor back again. So grant writing tips, we're going to talk a little bit about that. And this is our first and primary one. Thoroughly read and follow the directions. And you might, okay, that's obvious, Todd. But what we do see with applications is often a lot of the errors that come up is just from applicants not reading directions fully, not answering questions fully. So we really underscore this one because Molly, who usually does this slide, talks about in many cases up to 50% of applications show errors that are related to people not reading directions. And that often doesn't really affect an application's eligibility. Sometimes it can, but it can obviously hurt your application in the panel room if you're not answering a question fully. Next slide, please. When you're writing your grant, be excited about your project, right? Tap into that and talk about the things that excite you about it and that you think excite your community about it, particularly if it's a project grant in which the community is deeply engaged with what you're doing. As I mentioned, you want to address the grant applications questions directly and fully. Really make sure, and we'll talk a little bit about how you can do this in the next bullet, that you're answering those questions and giving the information that the questions are asking for. Because as you'll see with the evaluation rubric that you'll have access to, as Maggie indicated in the applications, you can look at that rubric and see exactly how the panels will be evaluating their applications, bringing their own experience into the panel room as well, and pouring their experience through the rubric as the lens through which they view your application. One way to help you do that is to have an outsider read your application. Remember that when you're writing these applications, there are people who, as Maggie said, have arts and culture experience, but they might not have the arts and culture experience that relates to your given project. So you're going to want to assume that that is the case and speak to people who might not know what your project is or might not know in depth about your project's art form. For our project grants, you're going to want to fully address the public value of the project that is of increasing importance to panelists. As you can imagine, we're a state agency. We grant out taxpayer money. Most of that taxpayer money is from Rhode Island residents. Some of it is also from money that comes from the National Endowment for the Arts. So Public value is very important because it is our mission and it is our function to ensure that every Rhode Islander has access to arts and culture events that are meaningful to them and to their lives. As I mentioned, you're going to look at that panelist rubric before you write your application. It's a really great way to start to look at that first and refer to it throughout the process. If you do 3 of the things I mentioned, read the questions thoroughly and make sure you're answering them. Look at the panelist rubric before you write your application, have it guide you through the process, and have an outsider read your application. If you just make that the goal of doing those 3 things with your application, you're gonna have a exponentially better experience than you might if you don't. Next slide, please. Maggie said this, don't wait for the last minute to be in touch with us. We're here to support you. We understand that is also probably really weird to hear because for those of you who have experience applying for grants from other entities, often you can't get them on the phone, they don't respond to you, they don't respond to your emails. That is not the case with us. We are state bureaucrats, as Randy said. We are here for you. About 30% of what, I'll say just for me, but I know this is true with my colleagues, not all our time is spent managing grants. For me, it's about 30% in a normal year. We haven't had a normal year in a couple of years, obviously. The rest of the time I spend, supporting the arts and culture sector within my given portfolio of organizations. So we're not just here to support you in your grant writing. We're here also to answer any questions you have, connect you with resources, connect you with people, connect you with other funders. If you have questions about who might fund something that you're doing, you can absolutely ask us about that as well. Waiting to the last minute, as someone who wrote grants for a very long time, I've only been at RISCA for 3 years and been working in grant making for 3 years. I found personally that if I waited to the last minute to start an application, I typically did not get that grant. And I will say that on my end now, as someone who's involved in the grant making side of things, that is what I usually see, that your chances of having a successful application drop dramatically if you start it the day of, particularly if you start it after 5 p.m. As Maggie said, communicate with us. We're here to help you. We can give you feedback, again, as Maggie mentioned, but not on the day of the application deadline. The drop-in hours, please use them those last 2 days. Just know, the best use of that is going to be for fine-tuning, really, not like full review of an application or discussion of a project that you're thinking of on that last day. Next slide, please. So image submissions, and this relates to fellowships. I'm going to wing it a bit here since Molly usually talks about this one. So for fellowships, and I'll just say specifically artist fellowships, the programs that Molly manages, I'm not sure how relevant this is to folk art fellowships, but image quality is very important. You want to follow directions on the file size and format and naming of your files that you're submitting. The panelists, when they're reviewing the fellowships, as Maggie said, for the ones that meet day of and look at materials, are looking at them together, and they're going to look at them on laptops or a large TV screen. So having them be really high quality is really helpful and important, as you can imagine, particularly for things like painting, et cetera. If the work is complex, including detail shots is totally a good idea. And if the work is large in scale or dimensional, you'll want to include an installation shot of some type. Next slide, please. Support materials. So for the project grants, for all grant programs which require support materials, they're really important. So for our project grants in particular, you have a narrative that you're answering questions in a narrative way, right? And then you're also providing support materials. You're going to be providing, if you're a nonprofit, some stuff related to eligibility. In visual artists, you're not going to do that. Outside of those support materials, the primary ones we're talking about here are ones that help tell the story of your work, your project, or your organization. So, examples of artwork that you as an artist or an artist that you're working with, if you're in an organization, has done, et cetera, et cetera. And we'll talk about some examples in just a minute. When you're thinking about support materials, you'll have the ability to provide anywhere between 5 to 9 different support materials. I believe that's the upper end, depends on the program. You're going to want to remember your audience, and you're going to want to remember what Maggie said about the fact that panelists are going to be reviewing for project grants up to 35 applications, and they're going to be spending about 30 minutes with each application. So understand their bandwidth and what they can take in and really provide things that support the narrative. You might have written a really amazing 150-page script for a play. Are they going to read that whole thing? Probably not, right? Because they're all doing this type of work outside of their regular lives and regular jobs. So maybe you want to include highlights, for instance. You might have 45 amazing photographs of the work you've done. Do you want to include all 45? Probably not. Maybe you want to make a collage that's a 1 or 2 page file, or maybe you would like to just have a couple images that are really important and critical that you think are helpful for the panel's understanding what you're doing. So again, include some, but not too many. And I'm going to talk about this. Let's move to the next slide. You can see the bullet on that slide I said relate back to the review criteria. So for the majority of our programs, there are currently 3 review criteria for our project grants, different than fellowships, such as focus on project grants where support materials in particular really come into play. Artistic merit, clarity and achievability, meaning the ability for a person or an organization or an entity to accomplish a project. And then the third one varies per project grant program, but it's something along the lines of public value, relevance to curriculum, basically relevance to a community. So you want to think about how your support materials will address those 3 major criteria for each project grant application. You'll have narrative questions that relate to those 3 major criteria, and then you want your support materials to also relate to that as well. So for example, letters of support from someone who is a community leader for a project can be a really great way to show public value. Resumes or CVs or images or videos of artists that you are working with to accomplish a project can be really great ways to show artistic merit. Press and marketing collateral, lists of quotes from social media can show, hey, we're a people or we're an organization or entity that has done this project before. Look, we have the background to address that kind of clarity and achievability criteria as well. Let's move on to the next slide. If we were doing a more dynamic live in-person section, I would ask you all to tell me what other things you think of. So we are now, I'm going to drop a link into the chat, and I'm also going to be sharing it with you via my own screen in a moment, of a sample project budget. One moment, everyone. Okay, so if you click on that link in the chat, it'll take you to the sample project budget. Again, if you're in a space or a place where that's not possible, I'm going to share my screen. And also fret not, because we will be sending a follow-up email via Eventbrite after this that will have a link to how to sign up to talk to us, to our Facebook groups that we'll talk about later, and also to the sample budget. One moment, everyone, as I pull it up myself. Oh no, it's right here. All right, here we are. So you might have this in front of your own eyes as well, but we're going to look at a sample arts access grant budget. This is an example project grant budget. It's very similar to the budget that is used for project grants for individual artists, project grants in healthcare, and project grants for education. And I'm going to walk you through why this is a good budget and helpful guide for making a budget. If you're freaked out about budgets, do not worry. It is completely common. We are here to support you in that. We wanted to give you this to chew on for now. So I'm just going to scroll through some things and highlight some things myself. You will see that the way this budget is constructed, the top half of it is income. It's where you articulate the variety of income sources you have supporting the project you're doing. On the bottom part of this first page are your expenses. It's where you talk about all the expenses that are involved with your given project. On the second and third page, and we'll get into these in a moment with more depth, is budget detail information section. So you will see that each section relates to some lines in that budget on the first page. And I'll talk about what these all mean. You'll see the third page is all sections that relate to you articulating what your income sources are. And the fourth page is the expenses and articulating about those expenses. So moving back to page 1, you will see in the income section, line F. So you see it goes A, 1, 2, 3, 4, B, 1, 2, 3, 4. Go down to line F. That is the total income for your project. That is both the money you're requesting from RISCA and the other money you have to bring to the table for your project, which you might not necessarily have other money to bring to the table for the project. That's okay, but let's say you do. You'll see that totals $8,050. Your total expenses, if you go to the expense side of things, go all the way down to line I, where it says total expenses. You'll see that that is also totaling $8,050. So the first thing to know that is kind of a really great idea, and the thing we advise everyone to do when making their budgets, is that you are writing this budget for a project that's happening in the future, and you can't anticipate all future conditions. So you're going to write this budget assuming that you break even, meaning that you bring in as much money as you spend. That might be different in reality, and it is okay if it's different in reality, but just know that that is how you're presenting the information to the panel. That's the first great thing. The second great thing, you'll see that this particular project has a variety of income sources there. So that's great that they have admissions, they have corporate and foundation support, et cetera. Because with the exception of project grants for education and healthcare with Arts Access and with project grants for individual artists, we no longer require a cash match. We don't need to see the income coming from some other place. So it's great if you do, that's awesome. It shows that the project can happen, but another way that you can show that the project will happen is showing community support for your project. So remember support materials, when we talked about public value or curriculum connection or healthcare connection, et cetera. Having letters of support from people in the community can be really helpful in showing that the project will happen and it's desired by community members. Another way to do that is in the budget. You can tell the story through numbers. So the in-kind column in the income side of this budget, you can put in stuff that relates to the ways in which there are third parties in your community, meaning not you, not people at your organization, but people outside you or your organization if you're at one, who are supporting the project. So for example, if there's a newspaper that donates, an ad, you can communicate the cash value of that ad in this budget. If there's a graphic designer who's in the community who donates their services, you communicate that in this budget. The police that donates security services for your festival, you can communicate that in the budget as well. Got it? So this project's cool because they have a variety of income sources. They also have some in-kind sources, but again, with the projects, with the programs that do not require cash, is a way again of showing community support, and also yes, this project is desired and will be accomplished. I'll get into the nitty-gritty of in-kind a little bit later. Let's look at the expense side of the budget and why it's good. So you'll see when we get to budget detail, which I'll talk about before I talk about in-kind, that first off, they're doing a great job of just showing, and they thought about all the different expenses associated with their project. And I'm sorry, I didn't talk about what this organization was. This is a hypothetical organization, of course. It's the Rosenbaum Singers, because Randy, our executive director, is a singer. The Rosenbaum Singers for a summer virtual concert that they're doing. So we'll see in the budget notes, but they have $3,700 in artistic fees listed. And they have shown that of the $3,000, the $3,000 they're requesting is all going to pay for artist fees. That is something we recommend. It's a value of our agency. It is also within the rubrics that you will all be looking at because we talked about it, that a high scoring application will show that RISCA funds are being used to support artists doing work or arts administrators doing work. So that is a good thing about this budget. They're using all that money they're requesting from RISCA to pay artists or arts administrators for their time. We'll talk about the details of the line items in this budget now. So hold on a moment, please. So going down to budget detail, let's actually go up to income really quick. I'm going to show you a couple of things. So looking at income, you'll see line A1, they have $1,500 in admissions and box office. That's what they're projecting is how much money they'll get for admissions and box office for their concerts. They have $550 coming from other earned income. And then they have corporate support, money from a corporate foundation, money from which is a regular foundation, and then other support and $500. And we'll talk about that in a moment. Looking down at the budget notes. So their other earned income, which I believe is $550, they indicate here it was online program ad income, and that they're estimating a 25% decrease over last year's concert due to the pandemic. So what's good about this budget is this is your opportunity, and this is important for people who are really comfortable with numbers and for people who are not, to like discuss how you got to your number. And you can see that the Rosenbaum singers, they just guessed, right? They're in a pandemic. They know they typically get, you know, more program ad income, but they're like, it's a pandemic. Let's estimate that we'll have a 25% decrease. So you just want to share your logic behind your numbers. That's really it, right? There's not a lot of mystery there. And some of that logic can be supported through research and talking with friends and colleagues. You know, if there's a vendor, you're using a graphic designer, you know, you're buying or you're renting those orange cones, those orange safety cones, you can talk to someone and find out how much those cost, et cetera. On the income side of this budget, you'll see, remember there was $1,500 in corporate support. That money came from the Flanagan Bank Foundation, and they've indicated that that money is requested so that the panel knows, okay, they've requested it, they don't have it yet, great. You'll remember they had $1,000 coming from other support. That money is coming from the Tree Board charities, named after myself. That money has been confirmed, so they marked it with an asterisk, great. So the other good thing they're doing is they're showing what money is for sure that they have and what money is pending or what money they're like, well, we don't know, you know. So that's just what you want to do, is just be clear and transparent about it. Let's look back up at expenses, because we're going to look at the expenses notes. So you'll see again, they have money going towards artist fees. They have $750 going towards advertising, PR, and marketing. $600 for material, supplies, and equipment rental. Scrolling down to the expense page, which is page 4, you'll see that the money for the singers are paying, they just show you, they just say 16 singers, they're getting this much money, boom, that's it. So you'll want to, again, use a budget note so the panel understands what you're doing and why you're asking for this money. You'll see too that they're spending money on printed materials to local businesses, as well as $500 on targeted social media ads. So again, you just need a couple of sentences there, trying to see if there's a remaining one. Yes, remaining equipment, remaining operating expenses, sound equipment, and temporary stage rental. That's all you have to put. You don't need to like cite anything or show a source or whatever. Just explain your logic behind your numbers, because that's what budgeting inherently and fundamentally is. To talk about in kind really quickly, you'll see in the budget on page 1, let me move this so I can see it. They had $1,500 coming in on the income side. They just articulated it as other support. And then they broke out what that $1,500 was on the expense side. So this is a little bit confusing. You're like, wait a minute, what? Like, why are we showing it on the income side when it's not really income and we're showing it on the expense side? For now, this is how this budget is structured, right? And just know that if you're confused as to where to put the source of your donation, like where to put that on the income side of the budget, just guess, make your best guess. We're here to help you with that best guess. No, the panel is not like, well, they should have put it here. They're not going to be like that. They're oriented to know that this is not Shark Tank. This is like someone's best friend from a romantic comedy helping them out in a situation. They'll understand because you're going to explain the numbers, right? So you'll see they put the $1,500, they identified it as an income source from other support. On the expense side, you see they have $500 for advertising, PR, and marketing, and they have $1,000 in space rental and utilities. There are 2 different in-kind boxes, one on the income side of the budget, one on the expense side of the budget. I would recommend putting the same information in both. That is how this budget's constructed for now. It will change and be more user-friendly moving forward. You'll see that they articulate their in-kind expenses here. They got a donation from the Rhode Island Summer Fund Program Guide, a quarter-page ad valued at $500. You can see they also, look, they got a letter of support from the Rhode Island Summer Fund Program Guide saying they were giving them that donation, which is one thing you can do. They also had donated rehearsal and performance recording space from the Community Arts Center, 5 days valued at $200, $1,000. There you go. So again, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. And Maggie, if you want to reshare the presentation. I can also do it, need be. Hold please, everyone. Oh, Maggie's got it. Cool.
Sorry, just took me a
No,
second.
no.
Okay, so we can.
So just to, yeah.
Oh, yep. No, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. So just to underscore, the 5 things to remember: the budget is in balance, meaning the income and expense sides equal out. Diverse income sources or diverse community support, depending on your project. We just want to see that it's going to happen, the community is interested in it. Showing your in-kind support again, which can be a way of showing it's happening, the community is interested in it. Seeing money going to pay artists and arts administrators for their time, and just explanations, very simple in the budget notes as to how you arrived at the numbers that you did if you're doing a project grant. Next slide, please. Let's skip this slide. Cool. So we don't need to do that. Only thing you need to know that was on that slide that's important, if you're like, where do I start with the budget? First off, it's easy to start with the expenses, right? So you can call someone, you can do research and figure out how much those things cost. And then for other things, you might have to guesstimate or estimate. And then you address the income side of the budget. And then you kind of hone and shape things from there to make it balance out. And just know that it is, again, something happening in the future, a part that's going to be estimated or projected. In terms of other help that you might need, we have all talked about the different ways in which you can have one-on-one meetings with us for fellowships to discuss arts access grants, education grants, folk arts, etc. I'm going to drop a link. I know that my colleagues have been dropping links to their individual signups, but I'm going to drop a link to a page that has all the ways that you can reach out to us to talk to us about your applications if you want to meet one-on-one. So that link is now in the chat. Hold on a second.
And while Todd's doing that, I'll just remind you that, again, typically we don't have the exact hours right now, but typically on the days, the September 30th and October 1st, there will be large chunks of time where there will be an open Zoom for you to drop in and ask any last minute, again, like not, oh, I have an idea, but last minute technical support questions about submitting.
Yeah, so thank you, Maggie. Again, that link is in the chat now. That's a way for you to sign up to chat with us, or some of us, you email us to set up a time, whatever. That's the way to do it. We have a couple Facebook resource groups we've had for the past 3 or so years. If you're on Facebook, we suggest that you join them. They're pure support spaces. They're places where you can ask questions. There are places where also RISCA staff post different resources, let you know about upcoming grant deadlines for RISCA, other funding opportunities, etc. So I'm dropping those links into the chat now. They will be sent to you in a follow-up email as well. We recommend joining them if you're on Facebook. And I believe next slide.
Nope, too fast. There we go. Okay.
So you have seen all of us today. We're all here. Yay! So this slide just reminds you of who we are and our bright, shining, friendly faces. And again, as Maggie has underscored repeatedly, which I appreciate because it's really important, we are here for you. It is our job. We obviously enjoy it. We wish we could be with you in person because it's way less fun to do this on Zoom, let's be real. So feel free to reach out and contact us if you have questions or need support. And Maggie, what are we doing now?
So we can do some general questions. It's not a great way for us to do program specific questions because we are recording this. So it's not the best time to get into it about the specific details about your project. But if anybody had a question, and I've been monitoring the chat, and I know my colleagues have as well. So I am under the impression that we maybe answered some of the chat questions, but if there is a large, big picture question that we can answer for you now, you're more than welcome to unmute and ask in the final minutes.